Welcome back, guys. Today we are going to be going over Seneca's letter to Lucilius, letter 44, and this is on philosophy and pedigrees. So let's go ahead and jump into this here. He says, "You're again insisting to me that you are a nobody, and saying that nature in the first place and fortune in the second have treated you too scurvily, and this in spite of the fact that you have it in your power to separate yourself from the crowd and rise to the highest human happiness. If there is any good in philosophy, it is this, that it never looks into pedigrees. All men, if traced back to the original source, spring from the gods." So he's saying here, he's talking to Lucilius, and he's saying that, look, you keep on saying that you're nobody, right? And that saying that nature in the first place and fortune in the second, but both of these things have treated you poorly, right? And he's saying that, but here's the thing. You have the power to separate yourself from the crowd and to reach the highest level of human happiness. So how could you say that you've been treated unfairly? Like you have the greatest gift if possible. And he's saying that, look, here's one of the best things about philosophy. Okay, it doesn't care about where you came from. It doesn't care what your status is or was or where you originated. If you trace all men back to the original source, they all come from the gods. All right. He says here in verse 2, "You are a Roman knight, and your persistent work promoted you to this class. Yet surely there are many to whom the 14 rows are barred." So the 14 rows means the seats reserved for the knights at the theater. Okay, and he says the Senate chamber is not open to all. The army too is scrupulous in choosing those whom it admits to toil and danger. But a noble mind is free to all men according to this test, that we may all gain distinction. Philosophy neither rejects nor selects anyone. Its light shines for all. So he's saying here, look, here's the thing, right? You're a Roman knight. You have this title. Like, you can go and sit at the theater in one of these chairs. The Senate chamber, it's only for people who are allowed to be there. The army doesn't just let anyone in, okay? But the thing about philosophy is that anyone can do this. Anyone with a noble mind is free to do it. So anyone can gain distinction in that, because philosophy doesn't reject or select anyone. It's just there for everyone. In verse 3, he says, "Socrates was no aristocrat. Cleanthes worked at a well and served as a hired man watering a garden. Philosophy did not find Plato already a nobleman. It made him one. Why then should you despair of becoming able to rank with men like these? They are all your ancestors. If you conduct yourself in a manner worthy of them, and you will do so if you convince yourself at the outset that no man outdoes you in real nobility." So he's saying that all these people, all these famous people, philosophers, that they weren't anybody, right? They didn't come from a high pedigree. They didn't come from a high class. But in some cases, like Plato, it made him into one, right? And so don't be worried. Why are you despairing about being able to rank to become like men like these? There's nothing that you have to have had, right? It's all within your control, not outside of you, that this is the case. He says in verse 4, "We have all had the same number of forefathers. There is no man whose first beginning does not transcend memory. Plato says, every king springs from a race of slaves, and every slave has had kings among his ancestors. The flight of time with its vicissitudes has jumbled all such things together, and fortune has turned them upside down." So again, he's making the argument, look, here's the deal, okay? Every single person, if you trace back the pedigree, kings came from slaves, slaves came from kings. They had kings in their line, right? And so it's all jumbled together, right? It's silly to try to make a distinction. Stop trying to say, oh, well, I don't come from this class, so I'm unable. It doesn't matter, and philosophy doesn't care. It says in verse 5, "Then who is well born? He who is by nature well fitted for virtue." That is the one point to be considered. Otherwise, if you hark back to antiquity, everyone traces back to a date before which there is nothing. From the earliest beginnings of the universe to the present time, we have been led forward out of origins that were alternately illustrious and ignoble. A half full of smoke begrimed bust does not make the nobleman. No past life has been has been lived to lend us glory, and that which has existed before us is not ours. The soul alone renders us noble, and it may rise superior to fortune out of any earlier condition, no matter what the condition has been. Okay, so he's saying here, again, the same thing we've been saying, like if you ask the question of who is well-born, who is, quote, noble, all right? He's saying it's the person who is by nature fitted for virtue, okay? Right? So essentially he's saying nobody. It's whoever is choosing virtue, okay? And that's the only thing to consider, okay? Anyone can trace back a date before there was nothing, right? Even a king, before then, he came from some lineage which they weren't a king's, right? There is no noble lineage, right? At some point, someone became a noble, and there became a noble lineage from that. But if you trace it back far enough, there isn't, right? And he's saying that that having a history, having a bunch of ancestors, does not make you a nobleman. Okay, no past life is going to give you glory in this life, right? You can't rest on who you are or who you think you are, where you came from. Okay, it's only the soul that makes you noble, and it doesn't matter what your condition is or what your earlier condition is or where you came from. None of those things matter. In verse 6, he says, "Suppose then that you were not a Roman knight, but a freedman. You might nevertheless, by your own efforts, come to be the only freedman amid a throng of gentlemen." How, you ask? Simply by distinguishing between good and bad things without patterning your opinion from the populace. You should look not to the source from which these things come, but to the goal towards which they tend. If there is anything that can make life happy, it is good on its own merits, for it cannot degenerate into evil. All right, so let's break that down. That one's a little bit more complicated. So he says that suppose then that you were not a Roman knight, okay, but just a regular freedman, okay, you might nevertheless, by your own efforts, come to be the only freedman among a throng of gentlemen, okay? So he's saying, even if you're that case, even if that was the case, okay, you could still become the only person of that class among all these higher class people or gentlemen, okay? And he's saying how? By distinguishing between good and bad things without saying what the populace says, whatever the people say, right? Like making your own judgment, okay? And he's saying that you shouldn't look to the source from which these things come, but the goal toward which they tend, right? It's not where they came from. It's what are they about? What is the thing about? Where is it going towards? Okay. If there's anything that can make life happy, it is good on its own merits. Okay. So if there's anything that's good, it's good by itself. It doesn't need to have come from something or come from some past. Okay. But to the goal toward which they tend, but okay. And he's saying that it can't degenerate into evil. If it's good, it's good. It's always good. In verse 7, he says, "Where then lies the mistake, since all men crave the happy life? Is it that they regard the means for producing happiness as happiness itself, and while seeking happiness, they're really fleeing from it? For although the sum and substance of the happy life is unalloyed freedom from care, and though the secret of such freedom is unshaken confidence, yet men gather together that which causes worry, and while traveling life's treacherous road, not only have burdens to bear, but even draw burdens to themselves. Hence they recede farther and farther from the achievement of that which they seek, and the more effort they expend, the more they hinder themselves and are set back. This is what happens when you hurry through a maze. The faster you go, the worse you are entangled." Okay, so here's really the big point that he's making here. Okay, so he's saying, where then lies the mistake, since all men crave the happy life? So where are people going wrong? If everyone wants a happy life, why are they messing up? Okay, he's saying it's in regard to the means for producing happiness as happiness itself, and while seeking happiness, they're really fleeing from it. So he's saying that they've got it backwards. The thing that they're doing to chase happiness is actually causing them to move further away from happiness. Okay, and he says, although the sum and substance of the happy life is basically what makes a happy life is freedom from care, and he's saying, and the secret to such freedom is unshaken confidence. Okay, but he's saying that yet men gather together that which causes worry, right? So when he's saying confidence in this case, he means surety, right? So he's saying that all these people they do the things that cause them worry, right? While traveling life's treacherous road. they already have burdens to bear, but then they draw more burdens upon themselves. And so they're going further and further from the achievement that they're seeking, right? So they're trying to be free. They're trying to be free from care. And yet they're doing all these things that are going to make them they're going to cause them more trouble, right? And so a lot of times people try to be free from care by even achieving a large sum of wealth. But in the pursuit of that wealth, they actually make themselves less free from care. They burden themselves even more than what they should need to burden themselves. It's not making them closer. And he's saying that this important thing is that the more effort they expend, the more that they hinder themselves and set back. The more that they're trying to gain, let's say, money in order to gain freedom, the more that they're actually becoming less free, because now they have all these other responsibilities and more anxiety and more trouble, right? And he's saying that's what happens when you go through a maze, when you hurry through it. The faster you go, the worse you become entangled. So the message here is really clear. It's this. It's like, look, if the highest happiness is freedom, seek after that. Stop seeking after the other things that you think will give you that, because they won't. And that's a hard message to hear, right? Even for me, because I've caught myself in that entangled web before, that maze where I'm chasing happiness, and I'm doing that by trying to amass fortune or get these things or get that thing, and trying to get all those things is actually making me less happy. It's making me less free, which is making it harder for me to actually become free, right? And to some degree, I've put myself into that situation as I've built up things and even building up businesses and YouTube channels and things like that. Now it's almost to a degree that I'm a slave to them, right? I have to do these things. I have to keep these things going. Whereas if I were just truly seeking freedom, then perhaps I wouldn't do those things. And so I wouldn't have put myself into that kind of situation. All right. That is a heavy one for today. We'll see you tomorrow.